Hello everyone and welcome to Mountain Lake Journal. I'm Tom Halleck. This week, budget talks. Lawmakers are running behind passing a new state budget, which was due on April 1st. Negotiations, as they often do, have gotten hung up over a number of policy issues that are included in the budget bill. We are pleased to be joined by Michael Cashman, the new Assembly member from the North Country's 115th District. Welcome, good to see you.
Always great to be here, Tom.
You're dealing with your first budget and all the negotiations and wheeling and dealing that go with it. No surprise, really. You have been through this in your days as a town supervisor, watching all this happen, and I'm sure Billy Jones and Jenna Dupree have briefed you on how this plays out. So no surprise it's dragging out?
No surprises. In fact, looking back, about 2/3 of the New York State budgets have been late over the last 31 years, right? So no surprises there, but it's definitely an opportunity for me to continue to bring the North Country voice down to the chamber and have those conversations.
Emergency extender budgets are getting passed so that state workers are getting paid. But does it leave municipalities and school districts in a bit of a lurch and not knowing what they're going to be getting in their budget?
Absolutely. The fiscal document of the budget is something that is really there so schools and municipalities and agencies alike really know what they can count on moving forward. And every day that it's late, it does harm to the system. And we should be having an on-time budget. And the reason that it's being delayed is that policies are shoehorned into the document, and they shouldn't be there.
And you've been critical of that for a long time.
For years, as a town supervisor, I saw the impact, and now as an assembly member, I see the impact as well.
What seems to be the biggest hang-ups this year?
There's a number of policies, whether it be the CLCPA, whether it be the car insurance, and a number of things. So those conversations continue to occur with leadership. And before we even get into the hard numbers of the budget, that's really marring up this process.
Let me ask you about the governor's push to lower car insurance rates. New York is a no-fault state. The idea is whoever's at fault shouldn't be entitled to maybe as many damages as they're getting now. If that gets dialed back, is the thought that the insurance companies will lower rates?
So I have a lot of colleagues that are in Albany that have been working on this issue for a number of years, and there are a lot of concerns about making sure that people are protected because accidents do occur, and this really seems to be driven out of the MTA actually. So we want to make sure that the devil is in the details as it moves forward and that people aren't harmed. Say someone's in a situation and there's a bicycle on the shoulder and then there's a car coming towards them, and someone has to make a tough decision in that moment. There is going to be some type of tragedy one way or the other. So we need to make sure that these policies and procedures don't leave people completely devastated.
So you're not backing these changes that the governor?
I want to see the details as they continue to flush out over the course of the days ahead.
You also talked about one of the other issues holding things up right now is the climate law. Do you agree with the rollbacks that the governor is talking about? She hasn't been completely clear on all of them, but do you agree with the concept of holding up this law from taking effect?
Yeah, and again, the devil's in the details. And the reason I say that as we stand here today, we still don't have all of the policies and procedures moving forward. My stance has always been, I haven't met a single person in my district that wants dirty water or dirty air. Okay, people want to protect the environment, we want aspirational goals, but what works in Manhattan doesn't necessarily going to work in Malone, and we need a regional approach. My colleagues, Senator Steck, Assemblyman Matt Simpson and I all have this conversation on a regular basis, like electric buses is a great example, something that's in the CLCPA that does not work for the North Country.
It seems, though, that your colleagues in both the Assembly and the Senate are saying, no, we're not going to delay the EV bus mandate. Plan to move full speed ahead with that.
But again, this is where I've told people that I'm an independent thinker and I understand the region realities of things. That's why one of my first bills that I put forward takes a regional approach and actually has bipartisan support. Also, my electric bill also has bipartisan support. So again, you have to continue to punch above your weight. And I also recognize that there are a lot of bills that get filed. So while my bill may not get to the finish line, I'm hoping that portions of my bill may come out through other bills or through the budgetary process. So being down in Albany, it's incumbent on me to continue to bring the voice of the people of the region down there and help explain to my colleagues what those impacts are.
Let me ask you about your bills. Are they still in committee?
They still are in committee. I've had conversations with Program and Counsel, which are basically the lawyers that help look at the nuts and bolts of those situations. And we continue to support other pieces of legislation that my colleagues carry because we need to address this affordability issue. The electric prices are crushing people. I've done farm visits, the small business visits, to talking with seniors and working families. The electric rates are crushing people.
That's what you heard from folks when you were at the Chamber breakfast a few weeks ago at that legislative forum. Was that the number one thing you were hearing from people?
And it's what I heard before. That's why when I was town supervisor, the Plattsburgh Town Board actually passed a resolution asking for the governor and these electric utility companies to intervene. And I'm still very disappointed that the governor hasn't intervened to this point.
So your bills, one would cap the rates
Correct.
at 2.5% for increases before the Public Service Commission. The other one you talked about would say that you can't have mandates that are statewide, that they just don't work statewide, that it should be broken up region by region.
Right. So where it comes from is we know already in New York State that there are two minimum wages. There's a minimum wage downstate and there's a minimum wage upstate. Now, I'm not here to argue or talk about the validity of where the minimum wage should be but we recognize that a regional approach works. What we need to do is to take a scalpel to that, though, and look at how the North Country is different than other places in upstate and also downstate as well. That's why the electric buses here in the North Country don't work. And we need to be looking at capacity, we need to be looking at the grid, we need to be looking at transportation, etc. This bill allows us to move things forward using the good work like the Regional Economic Development Councils and many more other programs.
All new purchases by 2027 have to be electric or hybrid, and the full fleet converted by 2035 for school buses. Districts up here argue the cost, 3 times the cost of buses are buying now, and infrastructure, there's just not the infrastructure for electric buses.
And there's lots of issues beyond just the bus itself. The infrastructure, we don't even have a good grid that's strong enough to be able to support it in some of our more rural districts. Take some of these buses when they have to go on a football trip or a music trip somewhere. There's no guarantee that there's going to be the infrastructure on the back end there. The undercoating of the buses. Living in the North Country, we know that is a critical need for the winters that we have. So we really, again, have to look at the regional needs and the regional realities before we implement these in our school district.
Is there any appetite for some of the rollbacks given the NYSERDA memo that came out about a month or so ago that talks about the projected cost, that people could be seeing $4,000 more to heat their homes. They could be paying $2.50 more per gallon to gas up their cars. Has that made an impact, do you think, with some of your colleagues, and does it make them more likely to be willing to go along with some of these rollbacks?
Again, everything's on the table until it's off the table. And the conversations that I'm having with my colleagues is that there is a recognition that there needs to be aspirational goals, but there are certain realities that need to be met. I was not in the state legislative body when this was adopted. What I brought as one of my first bills was the recognition of we need to do things a little bit differently here in the North Country. We have North Country problems, we have North Country solutions, but we need is our fair share from Albany.
Should the push for renewables be reconsidered? Is it too aggressive?
I think what I would like to see as it relates to the CLCPA is it should not be done in the budget. I think it's inappropriate to be done through the budget structure alone. As many things that get shoehorned into it, we should have public hearings, we should understand where it works and where it doesn't work. Like I said before, if it works in Manhattan, allow for certain parts of that program to continue to move forward. If it's not going to work up here in the North Country or Rochester or Buffalo, then we need to pull back on some of these things.
Along with renewables, Governor Hochul, and in fact governors in several states around New England, both Republicans and Democrats, have been talking about adding nuclear power. Where are you on nuclear?
I grew up not too far from nuclear power back in Massachusetts, so I don't have a problem with nuclear. The problem with nuclear is we're 10 to 15 years out from it. So we really need to recalibrate into the reality of what our resources are at our fingertips today. Okay, and then be looking at a mixed economy and what the impact is. Again, this goes back to my second bill, is we really need to peel back what is occurring in all of the different regions. We have a housing crisis right now. We can't go full electric. If there's natural gas at the end of the road and we can put a new housing development on natural gas, then we should be building those new homes tomorrow if we could.
What about reconsidering the ban on fracking?
I think everything should be evaluated. Technology changes. I have a lot of reservations about it. I don't think that the technology has advanced that far. But again, I'm not an expert in this arena. So just because you're having a conversation about something doesn't mean that you're for or against.
Once you get past the CLCPA, once you get past the auto insurance, some of the other issues are tax increases for some of the wealthiest New Yorkers. The governor said she's opposed to that. Where are you on the calls for tax increases?
People should be paying their fair share. And the reason that I can put it that way, Tom, is we need to make sure that we can support our teachers and have the infrastructure that we need here. Again, those bills aren't before us in the moment, but I continue to be very dogged in our approach to make sure that the North Country receives its fair share. Let's look at the AIM structure. Let's look at the CHIPS program. Let's look at how we fund our schools here in the North Country. Every one of the programs and services here in the North Country is not receiving its fair share. The governor this year rolled out this concept of the universal child care program. It's not going to touch the North Country for a couple more years. That's not universal child care. That's a pilot program being generated out of New York City, and it's leaving us behind. So when I look at bills, I don't look at it by paint by number. I want to see the whole thing and how it's going to roll out here in the North Country.
For all that's in the budget, it will almost certainly be a record amount of spending. What isn't in the bill that you believe is important for your district and for the North Country?
Addressing the funding needs of our school districts here in the North Country is not at an equitable amount. We have areas that are very land rich, and taxes are very high because of that. And while we may have a reduction in students, we are seeing many different school districts struggling to make significant cuts because of what they are receiving through New York State's budget. And not having a timely budget, does further damage. And also these ridiculous unfunded mandates like having to go EV. You're talking with administrators that are taking a lot of time and energy looking at things that can't even be fully implemented, as well as taking up money into something that's just not going to work here.
You have been named chair of the New York-Canada Task Force, looking to maintain the longstanding economic and cultural ties the U.S. has with Canada, especially Quebec and Ontario, to work with businesses and communities affected by the trade war, the tariffs, the tensions that have escalated between our two countries over the past year, and the impact it's having on cross-border relations, especially tourism here in northern New York and the Adirondack region. Have you been meeting and talking with your Canadian counterparts, Tom Clark and others, and are you making progress?
Yeah, we continue to have an open door conversation, both with my colleagues in the Assembly, counterparts in the Senate, members of the Consulate General. And there was a report that we're still digging into that the comptroller recently put out regarding the impact of the tariffs. Yeah. I knew as a town supervisor that this was going to have a rippling impact across the region. So there's a lot of work ahead, but we continue to stay at the table and have a good conversation.
Michael, thank you very much for taking the time to join us. We appreciate it.